In his book, The Youth of Zion, Chad Daybell referred to a talk by President Joseph F. Smith, one of the former prophets of the Mormon Church. He said President Joseph F. Smith explained where most of the false doctrine within the church originates. First, the hopelessly ignorant. Second, the proud and self-vaunting ones who read by the lamp of their own conceit, who interpret by rules of their own contriving, who have become a law unto themselves, and so pose as the sole judges of their own doings. These are more dangerously ignorant than the first.
These cult leaders are experts at taking one or two words out of a scripture or a saying and then twisting it for their own perverted needs and then presenting it as some form of gospel.
So here we have Chad Daybell, letter number 3. And for those of you who don't know or maybe have forgotten, Chad Daybell is a convicted murderer. He is on death row, currently in the appeals process after his trial, and he was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder in the deaths of 3 people, including his wife, Tammy. His second letter was all about Tammy, how she and Chad met, and Chad trying to make himself once again seem just like a regular guy. And I've said before that the reason that I'm going over these letters is because there are people out there who maybe don't know the entire history behind Chad Daybell, and they do think he is a good guy. They think he might be innocent. Maybe he was framed. We know that Emma Daybell, his daughter, started putting out the narrative of Chad being framed very early on in this case and investigation. And I'm going to keep talking about these stupid letters because I don't want any more people falling prey to Chad's BS. He's basically trying to convince people that he is a prophet and that he didn't do anything wrong. I think that where he's leading up to is to pin all of the blame on Lori, who has also been convicted and is serving consecutive life sentences as well. So for those who don't know or may have forgotten, Chad Daybell was sentenced to death in June 2024 for the 2019 murders of his wife, Tammy, and the 2 youngest children of Lori Vallow Daybell, to whom he is currently married and who's also serving consecutive life sentences. He does not deserve a voice, but Idaho does not have a son of Sam law, and so he is allowed to publish these letters on this website, and I believe that his only purpose in doing so is to convince new followers that he did nothing wrong and to profit from his crimes. At the bottom of every single one of these letters, in the bookshelf, there is a link, which is an affiliate link to Amazon. It takes you to a tab where you can buy one of the terrible books that he's recommending. This one, in letter number 3, happens to be one of his own, called Chasing Paradise. So not only is he making money off of the book, but he's also making money every single time you click one of these links and buy something else off of Amazon. Affiliate links can sometimes last for a very long time. So if you do click the links out of curiosity, don't forget to cancel out of everything else that you're doing so that Chad doesn't benefit from it. So Chad spent letter number 2 telling us all about he and Tammy's courtship and early marriage. And now he's going to talk about Tammy after they moved to Idaho, which, by the way, she did not want to do. But Chad convinced her that he had received a revelation that they were supposed to move to Idaho, and so they did. They moved to Idaho in 2015, and their children were in BYU, or they went to the local high school, and Chad talks about the friends that they made and how much Tammy just loved her new surroundings. Never mind the fact that he ripped her away from her family and the only home they had ever known throughout their entire marriage in Springville, Utah. He talks about the pets that Tammy was able to assemble now that they were living out in the country with a larger piece of property. He also talks about her carefully maintaining some garden areas. Then he goes on to self-aggrandize while talking about his publishing company, which Tammy is the one that actually ran. He says he was the president and the editor-in-chief, while she was the vice president and chief financial officer, giving himself the title of president at a tiny publishing company that literally only had 2 employees Again, just trying to make himself more important than he actually is. He says he was making good money writing a weekly online column. And let's not forget that column was on the Avow website, or A Voice of Warning. And Christopher Perrett, who runs that website, would put Chad's information behind a paywall, so people had to pay more in order to access that newsletter. Since then, Christopher Perrett has removed all of Chad's information from his Avow website, but they also have been labeled as a dangerous organization by the FBI. I have a friend who sends me their weekly recaps and newsletters, and they basically are just a warmongering, fear-mongering institution set up to make Christopher Perrett money while he sells prepper and doomsday gear to all of his followers. I largely suspect that there are a lot of people in the Avow community who still do believe that Chad is a prophet and that he has some kind of special spiritual gifts. And that's one of the reasons why I keep talking about these letters, because I want people to know the truth about Chad, or at least to remember that he is convicted. And did I mention he's on death row? Chad says that Tammy didn't need to work beyond her duties in the publishing company. And he talks about how much good money he was making off of the newsletter and the royalties on his published books, but I'm guessing it wasn't much. Otherwise, Tammy probably would not have gone to get a job outside the home. It's definitely a very Mormon ideal to be able to stay at home while your children are still minors, even if they're teenagers and they can take care of themselves, because creating a safe and spiritual home is a big priority for Mormon families. So most Mormon women would not work outside the home unless they had to. Now, definitely some would, and I think that's actually a good thing. But in Tammy's case, most likely she would not have gotten a part-time computer lab teacher job at the elementary school unless she needed it, unless they needed the money for their family. Later, she got a job as the assistant librarian at Madison Middle School in Rexburg, and then the Central Elementary School in Sugar City. She was a librarian there. Chad talks about visiting the school and how fun it was to be greeted by the students as Mrs. Daybell's husband. That turns my stomach, because here Chad is talking fondly and reminiscing about a woman that he literally killed. He then goes on to talk about how physically fit she was and how active she was, doing things like yoga and exercise, video games, and then talking about the idea that she had, quote, noticeable physical setbacks. He basically is trying to play up, again, this idea that the defense put forward in his trial, that Tammy had actually been quite ill for a long time. Although they left out the part where Chad was telling people she was going to die young for years prior to this happening. He says that she caught a cold during the holidays and she was fighting chest congestion, and a deep cough during early 2019. Then he said she was experiencing menopause symptoms with regular hot flashes. Chad tells us that Tammy says she felt she had aged 10 years in just a few months, but I doubt that Tammy ever expressed that sentiment at all. He then shames her by saying that her exercise routine faded away and she became content to just sit on the couch, watch TV, and work on her laptop. I wish you could see my face right now, but I don't feel like being on camera. Then she says that Tammy resisted going to the doctor, that she liked to use holistic medicine and natural healing remedies. But even most people who tend towards natural remedies know when it's time to go to the doctor. Most people who use those kinds of holistic things know when it's not working anymore and they need some medical intervention. Chad then goes on to claim that this time seemed different, as if something had shifted within her body. Then he goes on to talk about 4 main concerns. One was that Tammy would get lengthy colds and have prolonged coughing fits. Then he says that she had lethargy, an overall lack of energy. But just note that the week before her death, she visited her family in Springville, and she was vibrant, she was clogging, she was doing all the activities that she normally liked to do. And they said that they didn't notice anything physically wrong with her. If they had, they probably would have encouraged her to go to the doctor, or maybe even gone with her to the doctor. If there was something really wrong, her family would have noticed it the week before she died. He goes on to say that she wasn't the same woman who could work in the garden and care for all her animals. She began using the phrase, quote, need to sit down. How many times have you used that phrase in your life? And has it ever meant that you were seriously ill? I mean, there have been a couple of times, admittedly, when I was pregnant and I didn't feel well, and I would say, I need to sit down. And I really did need to sit down because I was not feeling well. But I don't think any of that was true about Tammy. Then Chad goes on to talk about swollen joints and bloating in her abdomen. He says that Tammy tried to brush it off as temporary water retention, but then says that they never went away. This whole thing is so disgusting to me that I'm remembering why I haven't done this before. And it's because I literally can't stand to read Chad's words and think about Tammy and how disgusting it is that he can say all of these things about her because she's not here to defend herself, because he literally killed her. He says one day that she came up to Chad, partially lifted her shirt, grabbed hold of her belly and said, quote, look at this. I can almost hear my guts sloshing around. Now, if Tammy had a good sense of humor, I can, understand why she might have said something like this. But again, you have to remember this is only Chad's narrative. Tammy is not here to give her interpretation of any of this stuff. And Chad can literally make up anything that he wants to, and he is. Then he says, around the same time, Tammy and his son attended a health wellness fair, and the nurse who examined her was bothered by how swollen Tammy's legs were and that she had developed varicose veins. And the nurse, quote, urged her to see a doctor about it, but Tammy refused. Well, here's the thing. Sometimes we get swollen joints and sometimes we get varicose veins. Varicose veins are not an urgent medical condition most of the time. There are people who do have severe varicose veins, but if Tammy had had severe varicose veins, that would have been noted on the medical examiner's report when her autopsy was done, and it was not. Then Chad tells this story about late August 2019. The school year was about to start, and she was sitting on the bed crying and called out for Chad, and she had a pair of pants halfway up her legs and said, these pants fit me just fine at the end of the school year. Now I can't even get them over my hips. Now, listen, we women get body shamed all the time. And so we are sort of conditioned to feel sad and upset when we put weight on, especially if we go up an entire size in pants or whatever. And I can identify with Tammy in this situation. If she had put on a little bit of weight, I have struggled with body shame my entire life. And there have been many times that I have sat in my closet crying, or I've come out of a dressing room crying because I'm upset about the way that my body looks. And so my heart goes out to Tammy if this was in fact the case. But Chad trying to pile it onto a list of things, making it seem like she was sicker than she actually was, is disgusting. He talks about the next day going to the store and buying her some new pants to wear to school, and that she had ended up having to go up 2 pant sizes. This is really Chad just body shaming Tammy for what is frankly normal weight gain when you're in menopause or perimenopause. He said she eventually resorted to wearing full-length skirts most of the time to school. Then he talks about the fourth concern being a series of fainting spells. He says Tammy felt her equilibrium was being affected, as well as her stamina, and it wasn't unusual to find her in the kitchen with both hands on the counter with her head down. She would say, I'm okay, I'm just a little dizzy. I truly wonder if this happened even more than once, or if Chad kind of invented this entire set of circumstances. Then he goes on to talk about a, quote, major fainting incident in April of 2019, which we're already in fall of 2019 talking about the pants, but he backtracks a little bit to bring in these fainting spells. He says that she blacked out and crashed forward onto the asphalt, injuring her wrist. Now, if she truly had been blacked out, she probably would not have put her hand out to stop herself from falling, and she probably would have hurt her entire face. Because when you black out, you don't have the motor skills to put out your hand and stop yourself. And so what is more likely is that she fell forward and put out her hand, and that hurt her wrist. But Chad says that Tammy then magically woke up and came into the house and explained what happened and said that her wrist might be broken. No, I'm sorry. If you blacked out and fell onto the asphalt, you would wake up on the asphalt, and probably it would be a long time before you were able to come inside, or you might call for help. Most people carry their cell phones on them, and so she probably would have called Chad and asked for help. But no, he says she just came into the house and explained what happened. Chad says he urged her to go to the emergency room, but she refused. She took an herbal remedy instead. Now, come on. Tammy was a smart woman. If she had fallen on her wrist and thought it was broken, she probably would have gone to the hospital, which tells me that she probably fell and hurt her wrist, but didn't think that it was broken. It was probably a very minor fall. She might have even just tripped. But Chad says she took an herbal remedy. Sure, Chad. Then he talks about Tammy fainting during one of the temple ceremonies that they went to over the summer. He says she collapsed backward and then threw up all over the front of her dress. How the hell does that happen, Chad? How do you collapse backward and then throw up on the front of your dress? Chad says she was very embarrassed as the temple's medical team rushed into the room to care for her. First of all, the temple doesn't have a medical team. They sometimes have someone working at the temple who might be a retired doctor or nurse, but they don't have a medical team. He doesn't give us any more details about this incident at all. And that's why it's so suspicious to me, because he never says, here's what happened next. We got her clothes changed, or we rushed her to the hospital, or whatever. I guarantee you that if she fainted in the temple and then threw up all over herself, they would have called an ambulance, and she wouldn't have really had a choice, because the number one thing that the LDS Church cares about is their liability in situations like this. So I remember being pregnant one time. I went to the temple. I wasn't feeling well. I wasn't to the point that I was going to pass out, but I did have to leave the session early, and they had somebody sit with me and stay with me until I felt safe to drive home. They, in fact, even called my husband and asked if he would come and pick me up. And I don't remember if he actually did, because I blocked a lot of that stuff out at the time, but they wanted to make sure that I was leaving the temple. They did not want me in there if I was not feeling well. They didn't want to be responsible for the liability. So 100%, either this thing did not happen, or Chad is leaving out what happened afterwards. And if she had gone to the hospital and received some kind of diagnosis, you know that he would have included it. That would have bolstered his story that she was not well. Instead, he leaves out all of those details, and that's why I think it's made up. Then Chad talks about an incident in September where she, quote, essentially repeated her fall in the back driveway. He said she fell in the exact spot, re-injured her wrist in the same place, and this time didn't mind going to the doctor, who prescribed pain medication and gave her a wrist brace to help heal the damage. Did they have an x-ray? I mean, did the doctor just look at her wrist visibly and say, you're probably fine? I guarantee you, if something like that happened, and especially if it was the second time, they would have done an x-ray to see if the bone was broken or if there was any other kind of damage. But he doesn't mention that, so that's why I'm guessing this also didn't happen. Chad says he suggested she take a couple of sick days to recuperate, but she shook her set head and said, quote, no way, you know how much I hate a substitute messing up the library. I'll just sit there if I have to. I do not think Tammy said this at all. This doesn't sound like something that a 48-year-old woman would say. This sounds like something that a terrible author would write in order to support his narrative. Then Chad goes on saying that there were more health setbacks. He says her nose was running constantly. Oh no, not the deadly running nose, Chad. And then he says she would have sneezing fits. Oh no, not sneezing. Maybe she was allergic to your terrible books. I'm sorry, I'm getting super, super snarky because this is really upsetting to me. He then goes on to say that she began to complain about having out-of-body experiences. Wow, Chad, wouldn't that be a feature and not a bug? You complain about having out-of-body experiences all the time. Chad says that Tammy described how her spirit would hover above her body for a few seconds at a time. Wouldn't those all be near-death experiences and something that you would want to have happen? Because that's a cool thing. It gives you spiritual clout, right? Then he says in October, he was in the living room. She was in the kitchen. He suddenly heard a loud crash and rushed into the kitchen to find Tammy had actually fainted into the open fridge. She landed hard against one of the shelves and was slumped down in the bottom half. He says he helped her stand up and told her he was very worried about her. She just waved her hand and asked me to help her lay down on the couch. Again, don't believe that this happened. Don't believe that she would have fainted into the fridge and that she just would have waved it away and lay down. Again, Tammy is not stupid. She would have sought medical attention if she was really having these kinds of repeated fainting spells. Not only that, but if Chad was actually a good husband, he would have insisted that she go to the doctor and probably would have taken her to the emergency room after an incident like this, especially if it was a repeated fainting spell that she was experiencing. Then he says the thing that I hate the most. The day before she passed away. She did not pass away, Chad. You and another person literally held her down and suffocated her. That's what the medical examiner concluded. She did not pass away. You killed her. He details the day before he killed her. He says she was setting up displays for the book fair at the school, and that evening she told family members she wasn't feeling well. I wonder which family members, because that's really not specific, Chad. Did she tell your children she wasn't feeling well? Did she call her mother? These are things that you would have known and you would have said if they actually happened. She later had a bad coughing fit before throwing up. We went to sleep, and when I woke the next morning, she had passed away. Definitely not true. 100% not true. First of all, we didn't go to sleep. Chad went upstairs to the cozy cone, and we know this from the testimony that was given in Chad's trial. Here's a bombshell from the Chad Daybell trial. On the morning of October 19th, Garth Daybell called 911, said that he'd found his mother. Chad then took the phone. Tammy had rolled out of bed and that she was clearly dead. This narrative that he woke up when Tammy fell out of bed and found that she was dead. And today, there was a bombshell testimony from a friend of Garth Daybell.
I remember he said that he found her when he got home from work, and he didn't know where his father was. She said she was kind of pale and her lips were blue.
When would work end at the haunted mill?
We usually left work around 12:30ish. Depending on how busy it was, we would go later. So some nights we'd go until like 1 or 1:30.
Was he clear to you in his statement that he's the one that found his mom?
Yes.
And was he clear in his statement that his dad wasn't there?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Finally, Chad says that as word spread of Tammy's death, everyone was devastated because she had been such a powerful, wonderful influence to so many people. He says, we feel that loss every day. Nope. He says, I miss her and love her. Well, then why'd you kill her? That's my question. And then he goes on to give this just disgusting summary of how Tammy is still watching over them and that she's interested in her grandchildren, and he knows he's going to see her again because they believe in forever families, which is disgusting considering his actions. Then we have to get to the bookshelf because that's part of the entire reason for these letters from Chad is so that he can put an affiliate link to one of his terrible books at the bottom. He talks about his LDS beliefs about families being together in heaven and the purpose of LDS temples. He then brags about how much temple work he's done for ancestors and tells a particularly hokey story about one of those ancestors whose name got left out, and then they felt her presence and went to do her temple work. Then he says 2 days later that relative appeared to Tammy's grandmother. And then later they found a picture of this ancestor, and the grandmother says, wow, that looks just like the lady who was at the end of my bed. Again, this is another one of those Mormon rumor myth type things where lots of people claim to have seen dead ancestors, especially if they've just done their work in the temple. Anyway, Chad says that this was the premise for another one of his terrible books called Chasing Paradise. He talks about why he named the character after that person they did the work for in the temple, and a character named Lucille plays a key role. And then he says, as I wrote the novel, it evolved into a full-blown adventure that takes place both on Earth and in the spirit world as a young woman seeks to reunite with her family in paradise. And then, of course, click that affiliate link, everybody. Then he does this musical notes section where he just wants you to believe that he is just a normal guy, that he loves music, and he wants to be relatable. And so he remembers this time when Tammy and he went on day trips with the kids, and they decided to visit Preston, Idaho, where the, quote, ultimate Idaho movie, Napoleon Dynamite, was filmed. Then he says that they've watched the film so much that they can quote the dialogue by heart, which, yeah, Chad, lots of people do that and don't need to brag about it. Then he goes on to talk about how they scoped out all of the film's locations, and frankly, it's incredibly boring. But all of that to tie in the song Private Idaho by the B-52s. I'm still not clear on exactly why he wants to share these songs other than just to make himself seem relatable. And I don't know, it's just very, very weird. If I ever figure it out, I'll let you know. But then he says it's not a clear representation of the lifestyle of Eastern Idaho. And so then he says Tim McGraw, Where the Green Grass Grows, is a much better representation of that. And he says, just replace the line about his corn popping up in rows with spuds for Idaho, and it works. He talks about driving along the Fremont County back roads with the windows rolled down and the Grand Tetons in the distance singing this song. Then he talks about his youngest child being in the high school pep band and starring in the school musical, and then talks about randomly cheering for the Sugar Salem athletic teams. Then he has to randomly talk about what they did in the summertime, going to Mesa Falls or floating down the river. Then he talks about 3 of his kids raising their families in the Rexburg area and talks about his grandchildren because, again, he just wants to be relatable. He wants you to think of him as a father and a grandfather and not as a convicted killer, which is what he is. So, again, it took me a really long time to even summon the mental energy to comment on these letters, and I absolutely hate doing it. But I feel like I have to continue and slog through all the way to number 9 so far, again, because there are people out there who actually believe his BS and who think that he's just a regular guy and that he was set up for all of this stuff. And I definitely think that that's where these letters are culminating, that he is going to talk about how Lori was really the mastermind and he didn't do anything and had no idea that those kids were buried in his backyard. I think that's where he's going with all of this. He wants everybody to believe he's innocent so he can continue his career as a prophet and a terrible author. Come to think of it, he's a pretty terrible prophet too, because none of his predictions have come true. So I will see you again for letter number 4.